Welcome, everyone. It is 55 and 5, the only show on YouTube where Cary and I go through the 1955 Parkhurst Wrestling trading card set, and we try and figure out who these guys are. I'm Ian Riccaboni. I'm joined by Cary Silkin. Cary, how are you?
Good.
Cary, we have a heck of a lineup coming up. Unfortunately, these last 5 or 6 have just been stumpers.
Man, you've been... I think you might have... If I didn't know you were such a nice man, I would have thought you possibly did it intentionally to put me into the simpleton category. So, but there's guys that are in the set that basically retired before I was born or wrestled exclusively in Canada. And let's hope that this week there's a few that I might know.
And these are a lot of fun because... For myself, I was born in 1987. Some of these names I've heard of. Some of these names I have no idea. I think to Steve McGill, who had a cup of coffee in Nebraska and somehow made this set in 1955. There's other names like we talked about. Argentina Rocca, one of the biggest box office attractions in the history of Madison Square Garden. So, without any further ado, let's run down the rules very quickly. Because Cary and I talk quite a bit, I will set my phone timer to 5 minutes. That means Cary and I only have 5 minutes to discuss this person, so you get a 5-minute history lesson on whomever it is. There'll be times like Steve McGill where it goes maybe about 2 minutes. There'll be other times like Argentina Rocca where the timer runs out and we stop. From there, I have a safety net. So with some of these names, Cary knows a lot about wrestling. Sometimes Cary doesn't know who these wrestlers are. It's not intended to stump Cary, but it is intended to help share the stories of some of these wrestlers. So, in my hand, every episode, I have a safety net with some information about the wrestler that we will be featuring from the 1955 card set.
Before you start, my good luck charm isn't here this week.
Who's that?
Uncle Gunny.
Oh, hold 1 second. Uncle Gunny and Captain Lou Albano, they are our judges who preside over the proceedings. So hopefully without completely knocking over the microphone, we can put them back into position there. And this week, Cary, we're on episode 16 out of 121. So we will cross the threshold shortly of about 20% of the set being complete. This one is a beautiful horizontal card. I will hold it up to the camera. I'll put it over Uncle Gunny and Captain Lou for good luck. And Cary, I'm not going to show this one to you yet. I'm going to set my timer. I think you're going to have 5 minutes on this guy, and I'll tell you why. One of the biggest stars in professional wrestling, maybe of his time, maybe, I don't want to say ever, but of his time for sure. I'm going to set the clock.
Well, in honor of Alto Reed, maybe I could do the horizontal bop here.
There you go. I'd like to ask you if you know who Bobo Brazil is.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, Bobo Brazil, I don't want to say he was the first, but he was one of the early black pioneer wrestlers, one of the biggest black stars. Now this is a 1955 card, which obviously means he was wrestling in the 50s.
Right.
And I was also recently watching the Sweet Daddy Siki, which I got to get you to watch,
right,
which is on Prime Video. But Sweet Daddy Siki references Bobo Brazil as one of his mentors, heroes, someone he looked up to, because Bobo was a great star. He as a little kid, he was always in the WWF, and he was. Did you know this? He was always the U.S. champion.
Right. He had a claim to multiple U.S. championships in different organizations.
He wrestled also in Canada, around the country.
Detroit. He was very big.
Well, Detroit, he and the original Sheik. But Bobo would come on TV in New York. He was very popular. He was just underneath Bruno or Pedro Morales. He was on the Chief J Strongbow level. And I would almost say that he was more of a special attraction, as opposed to he had, I'm safe to say, he had a lot of obligations. So I don't think, in other words, if he would do a garden show, he might not be doing the house show loop.
Right.
They'd bring him in for the garden. They'd bring him into Boston Gardens. They'd bring him into this Philly, to the Spectrum of the old arena. And he was huge in Washington, D.C. and in Pittsburgh. But once again, he was a national attraction. I don't know if he was booked by Vince McMahon Sr. I don't believe it. I never heard that he was. But absolutely one of the great black wrestlers, one of the great wrestlers, period.
Right.
And he wrestled into the 80s.
Yeah, I believe 1991 was his last documented match. He would go on, he'd pass away. He was born in 24. He'd pass away in 98. And he is one of the claimants to becoming the first black world champion. And there's two reasons you'd put him in that category. There was a controversial match where he hit Buddy Rogers in the groin. Buddy Rogers could not continue. And the match was awarded to Bobo Brazil, and he publicly declined it. They do that again with Bruno later on, where Bruno would hit Rogers in the groin. He would not accept the title. So an interesting old way to end a match there. He also was the WWA World Champion. And that organization, Dick the Bruiser, Blackjack Lanza. Later on, Scott Steiner would actually be one of the final champions. Scott Rex
Really?
Steiner at the time, yes, in the dying days of the WWA. But he had some incredible history. He was in the first match with a mixed race tag team in Atlanta.
Right. And I'm going to refer to the Sweet Daddy Siki documentary again, where Sweet Daddy Siki, and this is interesting because in 1955, black people wrestling white people was not flying. It was, Canada was much more liberal, and the Northeast was more liberal, but most of the Southern United States, they didn't want to see it, and it didn't happen for many years.
Right, and we talked about in the Jack Claiborne episode the idea of segregated wrestling. Bobo Brazil is credited with a lot of that, and he's credited with helping get the wheels in motion in desegregating baseball. Did you know this?
No.
So there's the House of David, which was kind of a religious group, kind of not. There was a covenant. They essentially sponsored players to barnstorm, and they had players of both black, white, Latino. Satchel Paige, Mordecai Brown, Grover Cleveland Alexander, one of the former great Phillies, but also Bobo Brazil. So he was on a barnstorming team of primarily African American players that would play against minor leaguers, major leaguers, and he had a lot of history, and it really helped the ball get rolling in helping the Negro Leagues play the major leagues and so on, which eventually helped in part to desegregate baseball.
Well, he was a great athlete. And one more note, I know we're going...
As the time runs out.
For once, we're going along. On Bobo, when we had Bill Watts come to Ring of Honor, and he did a sit-down shoot interview with Jim Cornette, two of them, which if you haven't seen them, they're just fantastic if you like old school history. But Bill Watts, I was in the car with him, driving from the hotel in Philly to the arena, to the National Guard Armory, and which was like a 40-minute ride. And I'm just asking him, I'm just picking his brain, or maybe it was during the show. And he also came to Chicago for us once. One of these places, I was just asking him about, his early he had this run. We even have a poster, which we'll use as one of our posters of the week.
Right.
He had a run in the WWF in 64, 65, 66. But he was telling me that in Washington, D.C., which was a predominantly black audience, he had when he turned heel and he wrestled against Bobo Brazil, there was so much heat in the building, and we're not talking about the temperature of the building,
right,
that they had to put up a net.
Wow.
Like they did in Puerto Rico, where the wrestler's entrance was.
Really?
Just because people were, they were throwing things, and they were particularly aiming at Bill Watts.
Wow.
And Bobo was the kind of guy that could garner that kind of heat. He was never... I don't think he was ever a quote unquote bad guy in his career. No,
he was a very popular star the whole way through. Last question: can you name his finishing move?
Of course.
Yeah, there you go.
The legendary Cocoa Butt.
A Cocoa Butt. And one of the great artifacts of this card at the time, it was called the Cocoa Bonk.
Really?
At 1955, it was still called the Cocoa Bonk. Although we know from collecting old baseball cards, sometimes the quality control isn't the best on some of these facts. So interesting to note that the card calls it the Cocoa Bonk. It's the Cocoa Butt. And a move that Gorilla Monsoon would tribute anytime anybody did any sort of maneuver like that throughout the rest of his broadcasting career.
And in my brief broadcasting career, when I was in Japan,
right.
I told the story when the guy one of the wrestlers gave a Cocoa Butt. I said to Ken, the translator, "Ooh, it harkens back to the great Bobo Brazil." And Ken goes, "Ooh, I remember him." But everyone remembers Bobo, one of the all-time greats.
I told you it'd get easier. We ran over 5, but this was worth it. This was worth it. I've never heard that Bill Watts story, so I appreciate you sharing that. And we gave Cary an easy one. No, there's a lot more A-list stars in this set. We're excited to bring them to you, and some of the names we don't know. Maybe the next one will be maybe an A-list guy like Bobo, maybe not so easy.
Okay.
With luck of the draw. So we're 16 in. 105 more to go. We will get there. We want to thank everybody who's listening on adfreeshows.com, everybody who's joining us on YouTube. We want to thank AJ, our producer from Bisson Creative and Web Design. And that's a wrap for Cary and I. Happy wrestling, everybody.